Hey, what is going on, guys? Thank you for joining us for the Blacklisted Voice. We're on episode 68 of our series here. I think we've been going for like 3 years or something like that. Laura is joining us today. How's it going, Laura?
Going good. How are you, Kyle?
Good, good. You avoided the blizzard that hit Minnesota this weekend and are in weirdly sunny Nebraska.
Yeah, yeah. Who would have known Nebraska?
Yeah, that's awesome. Couple of housekeeping things before we get started, guys. We just want to give a shout out to Amanda. She's one of my athletes. She qualified for the East semifinals, so she'll be headed down to Orlando in May. We'll be doing a couple fundraiser shirts for her. So if you guys are listening, you want to pick up a shirt, support her on her trip down to Orlando. Be on the lookout for those. And then we also have what we're calling kind of like a health challenge coming out here towards middle/end of May, and we'll be putting more info out on that on our Instagram account. Laura is going to be taking the lead on that. Do you just want to kind of give like a quick breakdown of what that's going to look like?
Sure. So this challenge is going to be for anyone really who's interested in changing their nutritional habits or their just wellness habits. It's going to be a 6-week challenge, and every week is going to have a different goal to work on. So, like for instance, the first one is going to be hydration. Are you drinking enough water every single day? And then we're basically going to have you track that throughout the week. And then every week we're going to add on a new goal. So like one week it'll be step counts, one week it'll be how much protein you're eating. And so this challenge is really geared towards nailing the basics and fundamentals of nutrition.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, nutrition and just health in general too, which
Yeah.
they despite what a lot of people, or maybe people don't understand like how much those two things intertwine, if that makes sense. And
Oh,
actually, what we're doing on the podcast today is probably going to show a lot of how intertwined those two things are. So, uh,
yeah.
yeah, and kind of caveat off of that, we're going to do a point system, and the things that we're tracking each week are going to compound on each other. We're going to start off with something easy, so something that's manageable for you to kind of do, so we're not throwing you to the wolves right away if you do sign up for this. And we'll kind of build upon that. And our goal is to create good habits over the course of 6 weeks so that you guys can walk away and feel the difference of how much healthier you are, or find some new habits to create better health routines in your life. We are going to do a point system with that also. So if you're tracking, we're going to do a point system, and at the end of the 6 weeks, we're going to choose a winner, and they'll get a gift card. We have not decided where that is to yet, but winner will get a gift card at the end of the 6 week period. So be on the lookout for that, guys. Love to have you participate and just start developing healthier habits throughout life. So okay, so to caveat off that, getting into the podcast now, we kind of already did like some foreshadowing, I guess, but so it seems like there's some prevalence of macro tracking apps starting to kind of like make the rounds again. And I was kind of talking to you about this, and it's when you get into that app and you start kind of setting up what your quote maintenance calories can be, they ask you a ton of questions, and it just seems like there's a lot of variables that can take place with those questions that they ask.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I not to jump in too early, but it's interesting like the different things that macro apps will ask you. And I think that like what's tough about them is that it's so different what everyone's criteria is for what it means. So
Mm-hmm.
like for instance, if you enter a macro tracking app and you give it your like ideal weight or something, it's going to base your calories off of maybe the weight that you want to be instead of the weight that you're already at, and not base it off of like the activity level that you're going off. And so you could be either massively under eating or massively overeating, but generally it's under eating. And a lot of times, if we're talking about the demographic that we hit with Blacklisted, it's people who train CrossFit.
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to be under eating. And a
Mhm.
lot of tracking apps don't understand the idea behind functional fitness and CrossFit, that it is so demanding on your energy needs that that's going to be different than someone who maybe goes to the gym and body builds for 30 minutes. And neither one is wrong necessarily, but if you're entering in a general macro tracking app that you're really active or moderately active, it's going to think that you are maybe like running 30 minutes, and like your calorie needs are going to be so low and they're not going to sustain you at all.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so like what so with that kind of comes some like and this is kind of where I guess we're almost diving into the meat and potatoes right away, but like
You're
under
right.
yeah, under eating specifically causes some significant problems, especially for like CrossFitters and people who are training significant, like who are preparing for something and they're kind of chasing performance. So what does maybe we can, sorry, let's maybe back it up here a little bit. So like somebody who is training like that, what are some like kind of indications of like of the fact that you're training like that? Because I think a lot of people run into being like, well, I'm not training as hard as this professional athlete, but
Mm-hmm.
you're like, yeah, but you're coaching 6 hours a day and you're training for 2 hours a day, and then you're going home and you're chasing a toddler around. So like
Mm-hmm.
when your app's kind of like asking you what are you, active or highly active or sedentary, what does that kind of look like? And are there some like maybe guidelines you can give people for like this is very active, this is sedentary?
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about formal exercise. So,
Mhm.
or kind of talk about the difference between formal exercise and non-formal exercise. Some people will know it as EAT, exercise activity thermogenesis, and NEAT, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. It's just fancy ways of saying how many hours or calories you burn doing formal exercise and how many calories you burn just living your life. And
Mhm.
so someone who trains CrossFit, like let's just take someone like who just wants to like do some extra training and then they do an hour long class. Let's say they train 90 minutes to 2 hours and then they go and sit for the rest of the day. So yeah, you're burning a lot of calories training, but then when you're going and sitting all day, you're not really burning more calories on top of that. So your calorie needs might be lower than someone else who's also training 2 hours a day, but then they go and personal train for 9 hours, or
Mhm.
they're 6 CrossFit classes a day. Their energy needs are going to be so much higher because they are constantly on their feet and they are constantly like moving their body, they're talking, they're thinking, they're expending so much energy just with their job. And I think that a lot of people don't realize that NEAT, that non-exercise activity, is actually the biggest indicator of your calorie needs. And it accounts
Mhm.
for 70% of the calories that you burn in a day. And so like if we're talking about someone who's like training to be a games athlete and they're training 6 hours a day, that's kind of different. They're a little bit in this like special group of calorie needs. But if you're, like I said, someone who maybe is just an average gym goer who does some extra work on top, or even does their own training program and work out 2 hours a day, you would really have to take into account the extra stuff that you're doing throughout the day for your total calorie needs.
For sure, for sure. So would you say like pretty much the people that are like training for at the highest level and for a specific goal and to like compete, at the CrossFit Games or professional sport level, those would be kind of considered outliers, and your macro app probably is not considering that
That
high.
is not, at that point, you can't use general equations. You need to get a coach that
Yeah,
understands. I mean, you can have a games athlete, like I think I recently just saw like one of the Panchek twins. They eat almost 7,000 calories a day
yeah,
just
yeah,
to sustain their weight.
yeah. And they're not like big. I wouldn't consider them like big individuals either, if
Mm,
that not to
yeah,
like knock them, but like
yeah, but
they're
strong. Obviously, they're
Yeah, right.
not like big as in like their weight. Like they're not
Mhm,
huge.
yeah, yeah. But like that should give you an idea of like that's kind of the outliers, like the 7,000 calorie a day. And you're probably, if you're active and doing kind of some of those, things that you just mentioned, coaching 6 classes a day, personal training 9 hours a day, like,
Mhm.
and you still have like a 90-minute training session in there, you're probably significantly higher, or sorry, you're probably significantly higher than maybe if your macro app is saying, eat 2,000 calories a day.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And this is where it's really great to have someone, I mean, like not to just plug myself here, but like a nutrition, they can take in all the different aspects of your life that contribute to your energy needs. So like how many hours a week you train, how many steps a day you take, how active you are at work, how active you are at home, if you're a main caregiver, like if you're going to school, like things like that contribute to your overall energy needs so much more than you think.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
like tracking apps, I don't like what's one that I've used before, the RP tracking app. Like it's a really great tracking app, but maybe for someone who has literally never tracked in their entire life and is so brand new to calorie counting, it could definitely work for them. But for someone who is like we said, this generalized CrossFit training person, it's going to massively undercut your calorie needs. And it's because
Yeah.
it doesn't understand the demands of functional training on your body and how demanding that is for your calories. And it doesn't really explain or understand the concept of like the energy outside of exercising. And so you could accidentally be eating hundreds of calories fewer than you need.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, too, if you're not kind of like what we've been harping on here is like, if you're not honest, maybe, is a good way to say it, about what your activity level is, it's going to put you at an even lower, if you're just trying to maintain, it's going to put you at an even lower maintenance level too.
Mhm. Right, exactly.
And this is kind of something that we had talked about prior to the podcast, but like CrossFitters obviously have seasons, and from what I've seen is people start to get amped up the closer the open gets, and so they're probably training a lot more. Or maybe you jump on a new training program. CrossFitters love to jump training programs all the time. And maybe you're going from class workouts to now you're doing, whatever it is. There's a possibility that if you're still following that old maintenance number and that number is significantly lower than what you should be at, now you jump on a new training program and you increase your is it eat?
Yeah. Yep.
You increase your eat. Now that number is getting bumped up, and maybe you increased your caloric intake, but now you're at your old maintenance number and you're
Mhm.
still under eating, regardless of you increasing your caloric intake again.
Yeah. And where it gets even more fun is if you're someone who some days you do 2 a days, some days you do one training session, you have your one rest day, blah, blah, blah. Like you have long aerobic days. I mean, it's
Mhm.
very complex. And that's why it is so tricky understanding your calorie needs as a functional fitness or CrossFit athlete, because everything demands differently on your body.
Yeah, yep, for sure. So like what are maybe now kind of jumping into kind of some of more of the meat and potatoes stuff. What are some signs that your diet isn't supporting your training, whether that be a sedentary athlete or an overly active athlete?
Mm-hmm. So one of the well, I guess they're all kind of big, but the first one that we can talk about is your sleep quality.
Mm-hmm.
So sleep is probably more important than your calorie intake. And you talk be like they could switch off, like total calories is more important than sleep, sleep is more important than total calories. But just suffice it to say, it is incredibly important that you're sleeping enough. And if you're not eating in a way that supports your training activity, you could be like your sleep could really be suffering. So you could
Mm-hmm.
have trouble falling asleep. very restless sleeping. One big indicator that your nutrition is not supporting your energy needs is that you wake up in the middle of the night and have to use the bathroom. And I know so many people that tell me when I start with them as when they start with me as a client, they're like, yeah, I wake up in the middle of the night a couple times and go to the bathroom. And I'm like, red flag right there. You're probably not eating enough. And of course, there's different reasons why. It's not like just, that one reason why you're waking up and going to the bathroom, but that is
Right.
actually an indicator that there is a cortisol imbalance that needs to be worked out.
Yeah, I'll say I know that I have been probably a chronic undereater throughout my pretty close, at least for the last 3 years. And I'll know it's getting real bad when I start waking up for like 2 or 3 hours in the middle of the night. And then I'm waking up just like starving in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously that should probably be an indicator, but sometimes Marines are very stubborn. um but yeah, that was kind of like a super eye-opening thing for me, and when we were talking was just, you know it's crazy like how under eating affects your sleep, and then how sleep can also affect your eating as well.
Yeah. And it's weird because I think like under eating, in one and the same, it can be understood as being in a calorie deficit.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, as a nutrition coach, they are so vastly different. Like under eating means you're chronically not meeting your calorie needs,
Mm-hmm.
pushing your body to this limit that it's like at a breaking point.
Mm-hmm.
And being in a calorie deficit, saying it that way, is almost like an intentional cutting of calories to lose weight.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I think that they are vastly different and definitely need different approaches. But chronic undereating is just, it's not supporting your energy needs. It's not supporting your training, whether you're doing it intentionally or unintentionally.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really running your body into the ground.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I don't know why, but it seems like it's so much easier to do that in today's day and age than it was, maybe like 30, 40, 50 years ago, despite, and maybe it's more so in the, kind of like a mentality, community, or a type mentality community, because I know there's a lot of kind of obesity in the world.
Mhm.
But it seems like it's much easier to do that in today's day and age than 30, 40 years ago. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, or
To undereat.
yeah.
So my thought behind that is that it is so common to meet people in the CrossFit community. I mean, even especially people who train a lot and maybe even want to be competitive athletes, you meet them and they're massively under eating. And
Mm-hmm.
I think CrossFit attracts people who want to really, really perform or like get really hard exercises because they feel like they're burning a lot of calories. And then on top of that, don't eat enough because they think that's going to contribute to weight loss. And that maybe that's a type A personality, but I meet people like that so often, and I can even say I was one of those people.
Mm-hmm.
But that is kind of the irony of CrossFit and CrossFit training, is that if I would say that if you want to lose weight and lose body fat, you should definitely not do functional fitness as a sport. Like maybe you can do it like an hour a day and then like go walk a lot and go live a really active life. But if you're someone who is even trying to train to go to quarterfinals, it's not a weight loss program.
And it's a performance program.
Yeah, it's an athletic program. Like you wouldn't meet
Yeah.
someone like the top athlete at an Olympic like sport like Michael Phelps. He's not trying to lose weight. He's not trying to undereat. He's eating 10,000 calories a day to be at his
Yeah.
peak.
Yeah.
And so,
The,
yeah.
yeah,
Just
I
want
think yeah. I think it's unfortunate because CrossFit started out as kind of like this fitness routine, but
to.
also kind of evolved into a sport. And there hasn't been a great separation of like, hey, this is the fitness and health side of the things, and this is the performance and athletic side of things. And like, so people still think that some of the principles that apply to health and fitness apply to sport and athleticism. And there isn't when it comes to nutrition, there isn't a significant carryover in between those things. Because when you're training for performance, literally, I try and stress this with some of my athletes, but like literally the only thing that you care about is performing. So you will do whatever you need to perform. And if that's eating 10,000 calories a day, I think Dmitry Klokov used to say that he would wake up at 2 a.m. to eat, it was like 1,200 calories or something absurd, to make sure that he was able to sustain his training. It's like you will do psychotic stuff like that to make sure that you can perform.
I remember a YouTube video I was watching once with Matt Frazier and Sam, and this was post him retiring from the games, and they were talking about his routine of eating, and he was like they were talking about when they would go to bed, and she's like, yeah, we would go to bed and blah blah blah, and he's like, yeah, and then I'd wake up and go eat more, and she was like, what? He's like, yeah, I would wake up at like 10 or 11 and go eat more food because I was so worried I wasn't going to eat enough to train. And it just shook her. She was like, you ate more after I went to bed? Like, that's how many calories that he needed to eat to perform at his absolute best. And there's an outlier of outliers, because he's always been known to never track his food, but he ate a crap ton of food. Like, yeah, he was eating thousands a day.
Yeah. And that again just supports his training lifestyle. Like people who are, maybe who are trying to target with this podcast a little bit more aren't on that level, but they do see that, and there's a trickle down effect of that, of like, well, he's eating, or he's eating this much, like I'm not, there's a little bit of a trickle down effect there.
Yeah. I will say though, as a nutrition coach, I have hardly ever had a person come to me who is overeating. It's always eating, always. I mean, I've had that have come to me who are training multiple hours a day, and they're eating less than I am as a female, training probably just as much. But I'm like, no wonder you're not where you want to be or gaining muscle. Like, you're not eating nearly enough.
Yeah. So sleep's kind of the big thing. And then you have mood swings written down in our outline here. Can you talk a little bit more about those?
Yeah. So mood is also a pretty good indicator of where your energy needs are falling, or where your current energy needs are. So if you're not eating enough, you can be extremely irritable. Like, you can snap at really small things that maybe otherwise wouldn't bother you, or just in general have a really poor mood. And I think that one is a little sneaky, because like, everyone has mood swings. It's super normal to have mood swings. It's super normal to be irritable. But if it's something that's like every single day, you're like, why am I so crabby? Or you're snapping at somebody and it just seems like so out of character, that is actually an indicator that something needs to change, whether it's you need to take a rest day, or an easy week of training, or just overall need to eat more. That's your sign. That's a sign.
Yeah, for sure. And then one thing I thought that was pretty interesting that you wrote down here was temperature regulation.
Yeah. So this is like maybe anecdotal, but it is also a symptom of not eating enough. If you are just constantly hot, like constantly sweating and warm, and you feel like your heart is like racing, it probably means, again, your energy needs are not being met. So like, if you eat and you're like, holy crap, I'm so hot right now, you're probably just need a little snack or something.
So that's kind of interesting, because wouldn't you, like, heat's kind of like an indicator that energy is being released or burning, whatever. But wouldn't, if you were chronically eating, you wouldn't have energy to burn, and so you'd feel more cold?
So I think it would be like kind of like temperature swings. Like, you just really can't regulate your temperature at all. So you could be like really, really hot. And then maybe like a couple minutes later, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm freezing. It's just this inability to not regulate your temperature. And the reason why, if we want to get really scientific here, is that it has something to do with your thyroid. So your thyroid controls a lot of your metabolic processes. And one of them is temperature regulation. And if you're not eating enough, you're not able to create enough thyroid hormone. So you're not able to regulate your temperature.
Okay. Gotcha. So it is a little bit more of like kind of like the mood swings, some up and down.
Yeah.
And they're
Yeah. Very irregular.
which is also normal to have on a day-to-day basis. And especially at night, there's like a rhythm to, or almost like a circadian rhythm to your heat that your body produces. But this would be like in the middle of the day when it's like, 75 degrees outside and you're like shaking and you like need a jacket.
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely a sign. Yeah. And I would also say like sometimes that is like this to a certain extent is normal. Like having mood swings is normal. Having some poor sleep is normal. When it's chronic, it's something that you're experiencing like every single day or more often than maybe is normal.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yep. So is there probably, so every day over 50% of the week you're experiencing something like that? Or are those kind of like some guidelines you would say, or?
Um, man, I don't think there's any hard and fast rules. I would just say like, if you're waking up like every single day and it's been like a week or 2 weeks and you're like, I feel like crap. I cannot sleep. I'm so warm when I go to bed that I can't sleep. I wake up in the middle of the night. Like, I mean, even if a week goes by, it's kind of a sign of like, maybe you just need to chill for a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like that's one of those things that like you actually have to be very aware and in tune with your body for, but it's like definitely a very good sign to indicate something is off.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, so next thing you have written down here is motivation.
Mm-hmm. Kind of one in the same with like temperature regulation, mood swings. If your motivation is just so low, you cannot get yourself to go to the gym. And this can be something outside of energy. I mean, normally if you're under eating, you're probably feeling chronic fatigue, really just low energy levels. But if you're overall feeling unmotivated and maybe just this feeling of burnout, that can be, I mean, you've probably at that point gotten like so deep into not fueling yourself that your body is just like it wants nothing to do with exercise. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I would say if your motivation is and this is outside of like just general being like, oh, I really don't want to work out today, I'd rather like go do other things or whatever, sit on the couch. But if you're struggling every single day with getting to the gym and like being excited about your workouts and you're just dreading doing your training, it could definitely be a sign that you're just not fueling enough.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I think everybody, even the elite have like these like days of just like or like sessions of just like, man, I don't want to do this high intensity, but I know it's gonna, get me to my goal.
Yeah.
But like kind of to your point, when you're like maybe you have like a double session, you're like, okay, I don't want to do the AM. I'd rather sleep. I
Hmm.
don't want to do the AM. I'd rather go do something else. And then the
Hmm.
next day you're like, I don't want to do my session today. It's like
Hmm.
those kind of like days is what you're talking about from like a motivation standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like if you're, man, I don't want someone to look at this and be like, oh, I never have motivation. I'm under eating. Like there's
Yeah, yeah.
because like I always see this on social media where people are like, it's not motivation that gets you to the gym, it's discipline. And of course that's true. Like you need discipline because motivation isn't always going to be there. But if you're experiencing a massive lack in motivation on top of poor sleep quality, on top of mood swings, on top of being excessively hungry, on top of having chronic fatigue, like these are all kind of pointing in that direction of like, okay, I'm not I'm not eating in a way that sustains my lifestyle.
For sure, for sure. Um, yeah, I think so. Just a kind of like life example there, like and maybe this is something that people can kind of take away from this. But last Saturday, I did like a pretty long workout. My girlfriend said she tracked, like she burned 800 calories. My workout was a little bit hard. We did the same things, but mine was like a little bit, call it RX plus, if you will. So I probably burned over 1,000 calories during that workout. And I definitely did not eat enough that afternoon, the next day on Sunday, or on Monday even. And I even trained on Monday. When I got to the gym on Tuesday, I literally could not get myself. Like once I start warming up, I'm generally good. The blood's flowing, the epinephrine's hit the system. Like you're generally
Mhm.
pretty good when you warm up. I could not get myself warmed up, and everything that I tried to start, I just shut down. I was like, nope, this isn't happening. This isn't happening.
Yeah.
And so that was in the morning. I went home. I ended up eating a ton of food, and took a little nap, got my work done. I headed back into the gym, and I took the 5 p.m. class, and it was a world of difference having actually had food in my body. I was able to, okay, this is fun. I enjoy this again. I'm able to go. And that's
Mhm.
kind of more along the lines of what you were talking about motivation wise.
I would say so, yeah. I mean, it can definitely be short, like short term like that or long term, but like
Mhm.
those little signs of things like what you just described can absolutely be like, okay, I cannot get myself to even try working out right now.
Mhm.
Need to take just a minute, go eat something, go eat some carbs, maybe take a nap, maybe your body needs some sleep. But I mean, you
Mhm.
even night and day difference, like just a little bit of energy like that can make a world of a difference.
Yeah, for sure. And that was kind of like I caught it early because I've been doing this stuff for 12 plus years now, you know. So
Yeah.
there's some experience there for me to like catch that early, and I kind of know my body pretty well.
Hmm.
But it's very easy to get caught up into a 2 month cycle, 3 month cycle of doing something like that.
Yeah. And keep in mind too, like people who are listening, that the training that you do on one day, like let's say it's Tuesday, that affects how you train on Friday. Because
Hmm.
Kyle, you probably know this, but it's like, doesn't it take a muscle stimulus lasts for like multiple days. So
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
squats on Tuesday, there's still going to be a muscular stimulus 2 days later. And so to
Hmm.
train hard on Tuesday, but you don't train as hard the next day, like, yeah, you could, there is going to be a little bit of difference in calorie needs, but overall, you're still going to need to eat quite a bit because it's going to, that muscle stimulus, that exercise stimulus lasts multiple days.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it varies for recovery, like depending on the exercise you do. But yeah,
Mhm.
usually like higher intensity stuff is like minimum 48 hours for you to recover. If it's like super high intensity, it's up to like 72 hours. So like if you have
Yeah.
sprints on Tuesday, like you could still be fatigued from those, like especially central nervous system wise, by
Mhm.
Friday.
And that's why it's so important for when you do a competition, not just the games, but even like a weekend competition, like let's say game day or fittest experience, that is why you need to take time off. Like
Yes.
take several days off because there's so much recovery that your central nervous system, your muscles, your joints, they need to recover so much more than you think.
Hmm. Hmm. Yep. And just like the amount of stress that your adrenal gland goes through during those competitions is
Hmm.
insane.
Yeah.
And that's what
Yeah.
I always tell athletes is like, okay, you might be feeling good, but you have to remember you just came off of a competition where your cortisol levels were elevated, your epinephrine levels were elevated, your testosterone was probably elevated, and now it's on its way back down. But like your
Hmm.
body hasn't recognized that you're not in that stressed state anymore. So it's
Right.
probably going to feel good for Monday, maybe even Tuesday. But by, Thursday, Friday, you're going to be pretty tanked, especially if you're continuing to train throughout, Monday and Tuesday there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess next sign here is hunger signals.
Mhm.
And you were saying some interesting stuff before we started the podcast about that. Can you dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, like everyone knows that if you're not eating enough, you're going to feel hungry. Like you have that, like that gurgling in your stomach. That's like, oh my gosh, I need to eat. Or like you get to like that hangry point of like, I'm so hungry. If someone talks to me right now, I'm going to snap their head off. Like I get to that,
Yeah.
I need to eat right now. Completely losing your appetite and your hunger signals is also a sign of chronically underfueling. Um, yeah, that's where my thought process is.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. So this is like,
typically people realize that if you're like completely losing your appetite and you're not really feeling hungry, you're not like craving any sort of food, that's not a good place to be.
Yeah. So this is like, I just got done with an intense training session or like I was spent 2 hours in the gym. I walked another 2 to 4 miles throughout the day. I had my breakfast. It was about 600 calories. I had my lunch. It was about another 600 calories. And man, it's dinner time and I, I'm fine. I don't really feel like eating right now. Is that
Mhm.
kind of what you're talking about with like hunger signals? Like where you want it, you could feel like you could just skip a meal.
Yeah, kind of. And also like if food doesn't sound good, like if you
Mm,
haven't eaten anything in the day, if it feels like it's work to force yourself to eat something, even if you haven't eaten a lot in the day, it's that is kind of where I'm talking about. So like,
okay.
yeah, like if you went and did a super hard training session and it was like 45 minutes of lifting, like let's say deadlifts, which are really high demand on your nervous system. And then you followed it with like high intense like intervals or even like Fran or something. And then you followed that with like running intervals and you're done working out and you cannot get yourself to eat something 2 hours later. If you're like, ugh, this sounds gross, I'm not hungry at all, like nothing sounds good,
Mhm.
that is not good. And
Yeah.
obviously it's not good. And I think that this one is maybe a little bit more rare than other things like motivation, mood swings, poor sleep.
Mm,
But it's sneaky. It's kind of sneaky, just like we said with motivation. If you're kind of getting in this spot of like, I have to eat dinner, I really don't want to eat dinner, I'm not hungry, nothing sounds good. It's kind of one of those sneaky symptoms.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like for a lot of people, it's easy just to like ignore that one too. Like, no, things don't sound good right now. Like, I'll go do
Hmm.
something else.
Yeah.
So, um, so we kind of have two left on your list here. So menstrual cycle is one, and this is predominantly, or it applies mostly to females. uh, so this is just losing your menstrual cycle, or is there like or changes to it, or what exactly were you kind of hitting on there?
It could be both. And so this kind of doesn't apply to those who take birth control because they're
Mm-hmm.
already altered menstrual cycle. But if you're a female who doesn't take birth control, normally has very regular cycle, and all of a sudden you don't have it anymore, or it's very irregular, like you can go every 2 months or 3 months, or it lasts one day versus a normal 7 day. This is a really, really great piece of feedback for you to listen to and recognize. And I think that like this one is not a sneaky sort of symptom. This is a really big red flag because it
Mm-hmm.
means that your hormonal cycles are irregular. And so if you're training too much and you lose your menstrual cycle, there are so many things that can happen down the line if you don't address that. And one of the biggest things is weakened bone structure. So osteo,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember growing up, and it was very common for girls to lose their menstrual cycle, and then they would like fracture their hip, or they'd get stress fractures.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so and it's very common. I think it's called like the female triad. Um,
Okay.
so it's like weakened bone structure, and then like other things that have to do, they normally talk about it in the context of an eating disorder, but you can
Mhm.
experience the loss of a menstrual cycle as a very high performing athlete too, or just someone who
Mhm.
trains. So having menstrual cycle changes is very, very important to pay attention to.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. I forget this lady's name, but she's like I think she's called like the period doctor. Have you listened to any of her stuff?
Um, I, I don't know if it's the exact same person that you're thinking of, but I do follow a couple women on social media that's really their whole thing that they talk about is
Oh,
exercise
okay.
and a healthy menstrual cycle. Like they talk about
Yeah.
those interchangeably.
Yeah. 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 I mean, that's a huge rabbit hole that I, it's, if you haven't as a lady, I suggest diving down because it can affect training. Like women are better on the front half of their cycle versus the back half. And some women are worse at the front half, better at the back half. Like it is a
Mhm.
crazy, crazy thing that can give you just so much data and input as a female.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the questions that I ask. And if a client is starting up with me and she, fills out my nutrition questionnaire, whatever questions I send them,
Mhm.
I absolutely ask that of all my female
Yeah.
athletes is tell me about how your cycle, like, is it regular? Is it irregular? When was the last time you had it? Are you on birth control? Stuff like that. So that if they aren't on birth control and it's irregular, that is a sign to me that they have been chronically under eating.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, last thing we have here is poor digestion.
Mhm.
Break that down in regards to like under eating.
Sure. Yeah. And this would probably be really quick just because I think everyone knows what poor digestion is. But if you're overtraining, you're probably going to have really like painful like stomach cramps, and your poop is not going to be very solid.
Yeah.
Like it's probably going to feel like really like painful. And so this can be an indicator of like your your gut bacteria is not functional, because when you're stressed, your gut bacteria becomes stressed. And this is why gut health is so important. Um, but if your bowel movements are very like runny, I know this is really gross to talk about, but this is your body, this is your biology.
Right.
It,
Right.
your body is not absorbing nutrients.
Hmm.
And probably means that your gut bacteria are not assisting in digestion because they are not balanced. I mean, it's amazing how interconnected stress and cortisol is with the health of your gut bacteria. Um, but if you are not, if you're not fueling properly, if you're not eating enough like minerals, like vegetables, fruits, stuff like that, and vitamins, it can really disrupt your digestion and it can really disrupt your gut health.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's like another rabbit hole that would be important for people to dive down is just gut
Mm-hmm,
flora, gut health in general. Like it is, and
mm-hmm,
especially in this day and age, like it just seems like, with processed foods and high stress, overtraining,
mm-hmm.
etc. It gets out of whack real fast, and it requires work to get back into a good state for that too.
Yeah, it does unfortunately take quite a while. I mean, depending on who you are, it can take a little bit of time to get your gut health back to a normal, a normal flora.
Hmm.
Um, and typically, like it still is a part of health that is being researched so much and is still not fully understood.
Hmm.
More that we discover about our gut flora, the more we understand that it is basically 100% dictating our digestion and 100%
Yeah.
how we absorb certain nutrients, how our health is, how our like it can contribute to chronic stress.
Mhm, mhm.
And so it is so important for athletes and people who train an above average amount to ensure that their gut health is healthy.
Yeah, yep. And I even read a book a couple years ago that talked about how it's almost like our gut flora is like our second brain.
Mm-hmm.
And like how like man, I can't remember the exact percentage, but it was like 90% of your serotonin is actually produced by your gut health. And serotonin is the involved in happiness. It's a neurotransmitter that's involved in happiness. And so like if your gut's not happy, you probably are not going to be happy.
And it sounds really weird and probably really hard to believe, but that is 100% accurate.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So definitely, I guess another rabbit hole for maybe another podcast to go on. So,
Okay.
um, so we kind of hit the overactive stuff here. What about like sedentary individuals who maybe they do an hour class and then they, go and sit for the rest of the day or something like that? Is there like, is there some advice you have for them, or maybe some signs that they still aren't hitting their maintenance numbers or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for someone who maybe is sedentary outside of training, they're probably going to have the completely opposite. Not, I mean, I guess not completely opposite symptoms, but they're going to have symptoms of like, they're probably going to be a little bit heavier than someone who is on the opposite spectrum as them. They might feel like they can't lose weight. They might feel really bloated all the time, like they're holding water. They might not be able to like gain muscle mass.
Mhm.
Because I mean, for any reason, like they could be overeating by assuming that they are working really hard in this 1 hour class, but only sitting for the rest of the day. It's possible that they're overestimating their calorie needs.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So just again, it goes kind of back to show like tr these kind of algorithms that apps use are very difficult to actually get a good direct maintenance number for people.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, for someone who is completely brand new to all this, they're completely brand new to macro tracking or calorie counting or whatever, a tracking app's like general equation could possibly work for them for a little while.
Mhm.
Um, but it's probably not taking into account all the different aspects of their lifestyle.
Right. Or even, changes to that, kind of like what we talked about earlier, like if you change a training program or something like that, like you also have to, if you are using that app, you also have to update the tracking, algorithm that you did. So,
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
um, well, cool. You have any other kind of tidbits or information you wanna kind of chat about here before we end this, or?
I mean, I could talk about nutrition all day.
Yeah,
I,
right.
I kind of just want to like throw out there to anybody listening to this who, is training a lot and it really isn't feeling like they're hitting the goals that they are trying to achieve. All of these reasons are great reasons to make sure you're properly fueling your body, but also don't waste your rest days. Absolutely
Mm,
take your rest days, take your deload weeks. They are so important for your overall growth and fitness and adaptability than if you were just to train 7 days a week for months and months and months on end.
mm.
You definitely need rest days.
Yep. Yep. And from a coaching perspective, I think my big thing is like making people think. That's kind of like what I like to do as a coach, is make people think, make people do like some self-reflection and stuff like that. And like if you're having issues taking your rest day, you're anxious on your deload weeks, you know, maybe you're like doing extra sessions throughout the course of the week. I would just challenge you guys to like really sit down and think about whether performance is something that you guys are chasing, or there's something else that maybe you're chasing. Like maybe you are kind of like in the boat of wanting better aesthetics, or wanting to look a certain way or something like that. And like coming to that realization will also help you to have a better relationship with both training and food. If you guys are kind of like in that boat, and it'll make your, if you hire a coach for performance purposes, it'll make their life a lot easier to know, like, okay, you aren't, there's something else there that you're not necessarily chasing performance, you're chasing something else. Because I know from past experience that has been frustrating for me to be like, okay, like, why aren't you doing the things to make you perform better, and having to kind of go down that rabbit hole a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is unfortunate that in the sport of CrossFit and the sport of functional fitness, aesthetic and athletic performance are almost mutually exclusive. Like
Mhm.
some people, they just cannot exist in the same body. And
Yeah.
I mean, there are people, like Christy O'Connell and Tia Toomey and Mal O'Brien. I mean, they are like the leanest women I've ever seen in my life, but they are not the norm. And so,
Mhm.
and this is something I have to tell myself every day too, of like, I really have to have those conversations of like, am I trying to perform right now, or am I trying to lean out? And 99% of the time it's, I want to perform. And so
Mhm.
you have to have those conversations of like, is this what I want? Do I want to perform, or do I want to look my best? Like whatever, be 10% body fat or something like that. Like there needs to be adjustments in your training and your lifestyle to support those things, because they are very
Totally.
different.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I would, you know, I would, I would push people to kind of understand that, like, what you are seeing from sport is the 1% of the 1%. They're the genetic outliers of the population. I watched an interview with, if you guys watch football, DK Metcalf. He is absolutely like shredded wide receiver, like probably looks like he has like 3% body fat on him. He had an amazing play where he was like 20 yards behind a cornerback who picked a ball off, and he ran him down and tackled him. So like, he's just a genetic freak of an athlete. And they did an interview with him, and he's like, yeah, I wake up, I eat a bag of Skittles, I go practice, I come back, I eat a bag of like Mike and Ike's, and then get some Starbucks, and then for dinner I eat another bag of candy. This dude literally eats candy all day long, and he's like 3% body fat. That's gonna likely will catch up with him later in life, but like, what you are viewing on television and what people kind of like idolize is so far off the spectrum of norm that it is something that you really need to come to terms with, and like understand that you might not be like that individual. And if you are chasing aesthetics, like, yes, that person looks like that because they're a genetic specimen, and like,
Mhm.
if you're chasing the same look as that, you might need to have a different training style than that individual.
Yes. Yeah. And when I get clients that express to me they want to lose weight, but they're training 10 hours a week doing CrossFit, and then on their rest days, they're going and running 10 miles. And then on their other rest day, they're like doing body. It's like, if you want to lean out, you need to stop doing so much. You
Yeah.
need to stop exercising so much. You need to moderate it so that, you're still training and having fun with your training, but you need to do a lot less.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like a
Yep.
lot less normal exercise and a lot more neat, a lot more walking, a lot more standing
Yeah.
stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. I'm a big fan of walking. Even if you're training hard, I'm a big fan of walking. I think it's one of the most underutilized training tools that you can have. So,
Completely agree with that. Absolutely.
so, well, sweet, Laura. I think there's a lot of good information on here. Thanks for jumping on today.
Yeah.
How do people find you on Instagram again?
My username is Laura Wilson, Wilson with 2 L's, 14. Or you can reach out to me at laura@blacklistedhq.com. That's my email.
Sweet. Sweet. Well, if you guys are watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe to the video. If you guys are listening on your favorite streaming platform, we have content that we put out on Instagram. We have content that we put out on YouTube, so you guys can find some more of that. We're big on kind of like movement quality, kind of some tips and tricks for your training. So you guys can head over to Instagram and YouTube to follow us there. And we guys can also follow us on YouTube to see Amanda kind of progress throughout her journey to semifinals here. So be on the lookout for Amanda, and then also be on the lookout for our health and wellness challenge that we're putting on towards the middle of May here. So thanks
Nice.
again, Laura.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Kyle.
Yeah, we'll catch you guys later.
See ya.